7 minutes.
The train was gone. 7 minutes. That's all that stood between my life and whatever was left of it. 7 minutes, and track 12 was empty, and the departure board was already cycling to the next city, the next destination, someone else's escape route. I pressed my palm flat against the cold concrete pillar and told myself to breathe. I couldn't. The image kept running on the back of my eyelids like a film stuck on a single frame. My husband's hand over my best friend's swollen belly. His face bent toward her like a sunflower tracking the light, and the breath just wouldn't come. I didn't know yet that missing that train would save my life. I didn't know that the woman who was about to approach me with a laminated price list would accidentally tell me the one true thing I needed to hear. I didn't know any of it. I just stood there, 31 years old, shaking in my coat, watching the city roll past the empty platform windows. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Max and I had been married for 4 years when everything broke open on an ordinary Tuesday in October. We met in graduate school. He was finishing his MBA, I was in my last year of a social work master's program, and the whole thing felt inevitable in that specific way that only makes sense in retrospect. He was organized where I was chaotic. He remembered to schedule our car insurance renewals. He made grocery lists on Sunday nights and executed them with a kind of cheerful precision that should have told me something, but I was 26 and in love, and I thought precision was the same thing as safety. I thought being cared for and being managed were different things. For a long time, I was wrong about that, and I didn't know it. We moved into a house in Maplewood, a real house, with a yard and a street lined with actual trees when I was 28. Max got us a coffee maker that cost more than my first car. He bought me a blue ceramic mug from The Grind, our neighborhood coffee shop, the day we signed the mortgage papers. It had a little painted bee on the side, gold on cobalt blue, and he pressed it into my hands in the parking lot and said, with the specific warmth that had made me fall in love with him, "For my queen bee, new hive." I kept that mug on the left side of the cabinet, always. I used it on good mornings. When mornings were bad, I left it where it was and reached for whatever was closest. The IVF started 2 years before all of this. I won't take you through every stage of it. There's no graceful way to describe what fertility treatment does to a body, a marriage, a sense of yourself as a functional human being. What I'll say is that we retrieved 7 embryos. We transferred 3 over the course of 18 months. None of them held. After the 3rd failed transfer, Dr. Miriam Alcott, my OB-GYN of 6 years, a woman I recommended to my mother, who I trusted the way you trust weather forecasts, maybe too blindly, told me to take a break. "Your body needs time to reset," she said, in a voice so carefully measured and gentle that I didn't hear the subtext until much, much later. "You've been through a lot, both of you." She glanced at Max when she said, "both of you," and I thought she was being inclusive. I thought she was being kind. She was being something else entirely. The 4 remaining frozen embryos stayed at Cascade Fertility Center, where Dr. Bernard Howell had become a recurring character in our marriage, our most reliable third wheel. Max handled most of the administrative correspondence with the clinic. "You have enough on your plate emotionally, Jen," he said, and I let him because it was true, and I was tired and genuinely grateful to have one less thing in my inbox. Every form that needed 2 signatures, Max would slide across the kitchen table at dinner. I'd sign, he'd send it back. Simple. efficient. Everything Max did was efficient. That was the word I used to describe him to people. Efficient, organized, reliable. The person who backed the car in so we'd be ready to leave faster. The person who double-checked travel insurance before every trip. I said it with affection. I meant it as affection. It's possible there was a part of me, a small and not fully articulated part, that felt managed rather than cared for. And I just called that part by a nicer name because the nicer name was easier to live with. I think about those transfers more than I admit to anyone, including Max. The second one was a Wednesday in March, overcast, the kind of sky that promises nothing. I remember sitting in the retrieval room in the paper gown and thinking about a project I hadn't finished at work. Brain doing what brains do when the thing happening to the body is too large to confront directly. I remember Dr. Howell explaining something about the grading of the embryos and the word viable floating past me like a leaf on water, not quite landing. I remember Max's hand over mine on the way home, the car heater blowing, neither of us speaking for 20 minutes and thinking, we are being so careful with each other. We are being so careful that we have stopped saying the real things. I didn't know how to fix that. I didn't know if it needed fixing or if this was just what grief did to two people in a car. After the third transfer failed, Max held me in the parking lot outside Cascade for a long time. It was late afternoon, September, the light going golden and indifferent over the cars. I was not crying in the dramatic way. I had moved past that, into the specific flatness of someone who has run out of a particular kind of hope. He had his arms around me and his chin on top of my head, and he said, quietly, with the conviction of someone who needs to believe it, everything is going to be okay. And I had pressed my face against his chest and thought, I hope you're right. I had chosen to believe him because the alternative was not believing him, and I wasn't ready for that. We drove home, we made dinner, we didn't talk about it again for several days, and when we did, it was in the careful clinical language of next steps, of timelines, of what Dr. Alcott had said about my body needing a reset. We had become very practiced at talking about the situation, without talking about the thing underneath the situation, which was that we were both grieving, separately, in the same house, and neither of us knew how to open that door without it breaking something we didn't know how to fix. Vera Cross had been my best friend since junior year of college, when we were both stuck in an elective philosophy seminar neither of us had wanted to take, and spent the entire semester passing notes about how the professor's pocket square never once matched his socks. She was my maid of honor. She sat beside me in the Cascade Fertility waiting room twice. On the bad days when I needed someone who wasn't Max, someone who wasn't going to be efficient about my grief. She brought coffee in paper cups and didn't say anything useful, which was exactly what I needed. Vera always knew when to talk and when to just be present. Or so I thought. She lived about 15 minutes away by car, in a 2-bedroom apartment she'd been renting for 3 years, while she saved toward a down payment on something of her own. She was the one who started The Unresolved, our true crime podcast club, 5 of us, every third Tuesday. We'd choose an episode, listen together at Dana Pruitt's house, then debate it for 2 hours over whatever wine Dana opened and the charcuterie board she took extremely seriously. Dana was a litigation paralegal, 8 years older than the rest of us, with short, dark hair and a complete disregard for the idea that profanity should be rationed. She used it the way other people use punctuation, functionally, frequently, without apology. Life's too short, she once told me, to say shoot when you mean the other thing. Lila Moore was the soft center of the group, warm enough to heat a small room just by entering it. A woman who cried at the sad episodes and cried harder when the perpetrator got caught and still cried at the happy endings. And nobody ever gave her grief about it because we were all secretly relieved someone was doing the crying on behalf of us all. Cass Fenwick was the opposite, bone dry, deadpan, the kind of person who would describe a Category 4 hurricane as a moderate scheduling inconvenience and mean it. And then there was Vera. Vera, who could recite cold case timelines from memory, who once delivered a 12-minute breakdown of a fraud conviction that had the rest of us taking notes, who had said at a Tuesday meeting in late September, in the context of discussing a particular episode about financial deception, "The thing about any successful long-term lie is that the person doing the lying loves the person being lied to. That's not a contradiction. That's what makes the silence possible. Love and silence are not opposites." She said it like a philosophical observation. She said it looking at the television, not at me. She was talking about herself, and I wouldn't understand that for months. The October before everything happened, Vera came to Tuesday Club late. Not unusual. She had a demanding caseload at her nonprofit job. What was unusual was the way she moved when she arrived. Carefully, like someone carrying something full and not wanting to spill it. She sat next to me on Dana's couch and folded her hands in her lap. When Dana reached over to pour wine, Vera put her palm flat over the top of the glass. "Not tonight. I have an early morning." Dana made a theatric face of outrage and said, "I'm sorry. Who are you? And what did you do with Vera Cross?" And Vera laughed, and I laughed, and the episode started, and I forgot about it entirely. I should have remembered. The first thing I noticed, in the way you notice things without yet understanding them, was that Max had stopped forwarding me correspondence from Cascade. He'd always done it, a quick email, FYI, sometimes with a brief note, nothing urgent. In November, they stopped. I assumed the communication had simply dried up, since we were in a break period. I assumed and left it there. The second thing was Max's work stress. He came home in December looking wrung out in a specific way. Not tired exactly, but compressed, like something held under sustained pressure. When I asked, he said it was a funding deadline. He worked in corporate finance. There were always deadlines. I put it down and left it there too. The third thing was harder to dismiss. It was a Saturday in late January, and I was looking for our car registration in the kitchen document drawer. Not the junk drawer, but the organized one, the color-coded folder one, which was obviously Max's domain, which I only opened when I needed something specific. The letter was there, face up, unsealed, addressed only to Max, not to both of us. In 4 years of fertility treatment, nothing had ever been addressed only to Max. I read the first line before I made a decision about whether I should. Dear Mr. Stanton, please find enclosed the updated consent documentation regarding case number CF-2248, scheduled for second trimester monitoring on February 14th. I put the letter back. My hands were very steady, which surprised me. Second trimester monitoring. Second trimester. We hadn't done a transfer since August. We were on a break. There was no transfer on record. I thought, administrative error. Wrong patient file. I thought, I should ask Max. I did not ask Max, because on some level I understood that asking would mean knowing, and knowing would mean the end of something I wasn't yet ready to end. So I went to yoga. I came home and made pasta. I drank half a glass of wine and left the rest. I watched Max move through our kitchen with his particular efficient warmth, and I said nothing. For 3 weeks, I said nothing. The letter sat in the drawer like a coal in a pocket. I thought about those Tuesdays at Cascade, the 2 times Vera had come with me. The first was the second retrieval. She sat in the plastic chair beside me and read a magazine upside down for 20 minutes before either of us noticed. And when I pointed it out, she said, "I thought the recipes looked better this way." And I had laughed so hard that 2 other people in the waiting room looked over, and that laugh had been, I think, the last completely uncomplicated thing between us before everything. The second time, after the first failed transfer, she drove me home because I wasn't supposed to drive after the medication, and she put on the specific playlist she knew I used when I needed to not think. And she didn't say a single word for 40 minutes, not one. Just drove and let the music do what music does. I thought, no one knows me like this. I thought, I am so lucky to have someone like this. I kept thinking it right up until October, and then I had to rebuild the sentence from scratch. It was a Tuesday in October when everything cracked open for good. I'd taken a half day from work, a supervision meeting canceled last minute, and found myself downtown at 2 in the afternoon with nowhere to be. I texted Vera. No response, which meant she was probably at her desk. I thought, coffee. I thought, the grind. I walked 2 blocks and looked through the window the way you do when you're hoping to spot someone familiar. I spotted someone familiar. Max was at the corner table, our corner table, the one we always angled for, leaning across it with both forearms flat on the surface. Vera sat across from him. His hand was over hers, not a consoling gesture, not a professional contact, but the specific kind of hand-holding that means something definitive. His palm covering her knuckles with a concentrated tenderness I recognized from the early years of our marriage, the pre-clinic years, when he looked at me that way. Vera was talking. Her coat was open, her sweater was stretched over a belly I hadn't seen before because she'd been wearing loose layers at every Tuesday meeting since November, because she lived 15 minutes away and I saw her regularly, because she was my best friend and I trusted her, and I had simply not looked. The pregnancy was not subtle. 6 months maybe, possibly more. I don't know how long I stood on that sidewalk. Long enough for someone to walk around me with an audible exhale. Long enough for the image to become permanent. Max, Vera, the window, the hand, the belly, the tenderness. Calcified and exact, so that even now, even knowing the full picture, that particular frame still lives in me like a splinter I can locate but not quite extract. I walked to the train station, 16 blocks. I didn't feel any of them. The only coherent thought I had was my mother. She lived in Allenport, 3 hours by train, and she was the kind of person who didn't press you to explain yourself immediately, who would make tea and let you sit in it for as long as you needed. I stopped at the house for my rolling bag. 7 minutes. I know because I clocked it afterward, compulsively, the way you replay things you can't undo. 7 minutes total. And then I was back on the street and moving. The 2:54 to Allenport left from track 12. I got there at 3:01. The train was gone. I sat on a bench near the departure board with my rolling bag between my knees, and something cracked open in my chest. Not the controlled grief of the post-transfer parking lots, not the tidy sadness I had become practiced at managing, but something bigger and older and messier, a grief that had nothing to do with trains and everything to do with the accumulated weight of the past 2 years and the specific image still burning in my head. I pressed my hands over my face and cried in the airport bench way, the undignified kind, the kind where strangers choose the next bench over out of polite alarm. "You're crying because of a man," said a voice to my left. I took my hands off my face. A woman had set up a folding table 4 feet from my bench. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the particular expression of someone who has committed to a professional demeanor and intends to sustain it regardless of circumstances. She wore a purple knit shawl over a fleece vest. On her table, a piece of red velvet that appeared to have been cut from a holiday tablecloth, a spread of tarot cards, and a laminated card propped against a small stand. Madame Rosa, past, present, and future. $15/$25/$40. The lamination had a bubble in the upper right corner. 2 of the tarot cards had a faint coffee stain along one edge. She was typing something with one thumb on her phone and only partially attending to the universe. Thickly, wiping my face with my sleeve, I'm not. Madame Rosa glanced up from the phone and then at the departure board. You missed the 2:54. You arrived at 3:01, she tapped her temple. I observe details. That's not mysticism, that's a clock. Details are details. She tucked the phone away, reshuffled the tarot cards with surprisingly practiced ease, and looked at me with the focused sincerity of someone who has decided this is her calling. What I see is that the train leaving without you was not a failure. It was a correction. She turned a card. It showed a figure standing at a crossroads, which felt aggressively on the nose. You left the keys to the situation at home. You need to go back and get them. I need to get to my mother. Your mother will be there tomorrow. The situation is happening now. She pointed at another card without looking at it. Go to the one who holds what you think has been taken, not what you think, what is actual. I stared at her. She waited with the patience of a woman who charges by the reading and has nowhere else to be. I almost left. The 4:10 to Allenport left from Westbrook Station 20 minutes away. I could make it if I called a car right now. But something in me, something tired and uncertain and not yet ready to outrun the image from the cafe window, stayed still. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I had seen. I knew what I had assumed. And there was a quiet and insistent whisper underneath the assumption that I couldn't silence. You know what you saw. You don't know what it meant. How much for the $15 reading? I asked. Madame Rosa slid the laminated card toward me without breaking eye contact. I texted Vera from the taxi. Coming over, need to talk. She responded in under a minute. This should have told me she was home and braced. Instead, I stared out the window and rehearsed sentences I would not end up using. Vera opened the door and I saw her belly, not through a cafe window, not glimpsed across a crowded table, but right there in her own doorway, in her own apartment, without any buffer available. And my mouth said, before any decision was made about words, how long? Not a question, more like a declaration of coordinates. Vera's face moved through several things in rapid succession. Hope that I meant something else, recognition that I didn't, a brief and nauseating pause. Then she opened the door wider and said, "Come inside, Jen." The apartment was warm. She had bergamot candles burning, the ones I gave her for her birthday, because she'd mentioned once that she liked them, and I had remembered, because that's what you do when someone is your best friend. You remember the small things. A mug of decaf sat on the coffee table. The whole scene had the quality of something carefully maintained, something tended over time. I stood in her living room and looked at her properly, her face rounder, her movements deliberate and unhurried, one hand resting at her side without her seeming to notice it. And I thought, how did I not see this? And then, in the beat right after, who else saw? Sit down, Vera said. Tell me first. She sat instead on the edge of the couch and folded her hands on top of her belly in a gesture that was certainly unconscious and landed in my chest like a closed fist. Max asked me not to tell you. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how it sounds. But I need you to hear everything before you decide what it means. How many weeks, Vera? 23. 23 weeks. 23 weeks, and she had sat beside me at 3 Tuesday meetings and discussed cases of deception, cases of silence, cases where one person's secret restructured another person's life, and she had done it with her glass of water passed off as a preference, her loose layers passed off as autumn dressing, her careful movements passed off as habit. I sat down because my legs required it. "Those are my embryos," I said, "aren't they?" The pause was very small and very loud. Yes. The room didn't rearrange itself. A bus went by outside. The candles moved. My body continued operating with complete indifference to the fact that my reality had just been rebuilt from the studs. I put my palms flat on my knees and breathed through my nose and waited for the rest. "Max came to me in September," Vera said, "after Dr. Alcott told you both that another cycle so soon would put your body under too much stress. He'd been thinking about it for a while. He said—" She stopped, started again. "He said he couldn't keep watching you go through it, that he needed to find another way. He asked if I'd be the gestational carrier. He thought if he could give you a child without putting you through another transfer, another possible loss, he was doing the right thing. He was so completely certain he was doing the right thing." "Without telling me," I said. "He thought you'd say no. He thought you'd want to be the one to carry, and that you'd override what was actually good for you because that's how much you wanted it." Vera looked at me, and her eyes were wet. I told him he was wrong. In the beginning, I told him that. I told him you had the right to know, that you had the right to decide. But he was— Her voice shifted, something slipping through. "He was so fucking certain, Jen. So completely sure he understood your limits better than you did. And I—" She stopped. "And you agreed anyway," I said. "I agreed because I love you, and because I believed him when he said you'd fall apart, and because the down payment I've been trying to save for 4 years would have taken me another 4 years without—" She closed her eyes. "The surrogacy compensation. I know. I know exactly how that sounds." I sat with that for a while. The truth was arriving in layers, not all at once, the way a photograph develops. First the outline, then the shapes, then the detail you hadn't expected. My husband had gone to my best friend in September and arranged, without my knowledge, for her to carry my embryos. He had paid her. He had told her it was an act of love. He had handled all the paperwork, efficiently, carefully, the way he handled everything. I had signed forms at the kitchen table. I had signed forms with absolute trust, because trusting him was the deal, because he managed things so I didn't have to, because I had called that arrangement care when it was really something with a different name. "Vera," I said, and my voice came out completely level, which surprised both of us. "Those were my embryos, my genetic material, not his to offer, not yours to carry without my consent. Whatever his reasons were, whatever he told you, those were mine." She didn't answer. There was no answer to that. I picked up my bag. I looked at the candles, the decaf, the apartment that had been holding this secret since September. I'm going home, I said. I'm going to talk to Max, and I need you to send me the name of the lawyer you used for the surrogacy contract. Vera blinked. Why? Because I need to read what I apparently already signed. Max wasn't home. He texted around 6 to say he'd be late, and I answered with, okay, and I went to his office and opened the file box on the third shelf. The consent documentation was a standard surrogacy authorization form from Cascade Fertility Center, requiring the signature of both genetic parents in the case of embryo transfer to a gestational carrier. Both genetic parents, 2 signatures, required. My signature was on page 4. I held the page under the desk lamp and looked at it for a long time. The loops were right. The way the J connected to the E was correct, right down to the slight leftward lean I'd never consciously noticed in my own handwriting. But the date beside the signature was October 14th. On October 14th, I had been in Cincinnati at a 3-day professional conference, sharing a hotel room with a colleague, attending sessions from 8 a.m. until 6, and I had signed nothing from Cascade Fertility Center. I had my conference registration with timestamps. I had a photograph on my phone from that Thursday evening. Me, my colleague, 2 other attendees at the welcome reception, holding name badges, all of us grinning into someone's camera. October 14th, Tuesday. Max had been home. Max had signed my name to a medical consent form and dated it and filed it. The room felt very small. I thought, this is a crime. Not an ethical failure, not a communication breakdown, an actual crime with a specific legal name. I photographed the signature page, the date, every document in the folder. I sent it all to my personal email. Then I put the folder back exactly where I had found it, and I went to the kitchen and I took the blue bee mug off its shelf and stood there holding it. The glaze had a small chip near the base, triangular, clean, that I had never noticed before. I set the mug on the counter and did not put it back where it belonged. Max came home at 10:15. He stopped in the kitchen doorway when he saw me, and something moved across his face, a rapid recalibration, the specific adjustment of a person who has been preparing for a conversation and realizes they may have prepared for the wrong version of it. Hey, you're up late. Sit down, Max. He sat. I put my phone on the table with the photo of the signature page facing up, and I waited. The silence that followed was one of the most instructive silences of my life. He looked at the photo, then at me, then at the table. For 3 seconds, he said nothing. A man who always had words, who managed things with words, who could explain any position with the patient confidence of someone accustomed to being the most organized person in the room. 3 seconds of absolute silence, and I heard everything in it I needed to hear. I was going to tell you, he said finally, when she was further along, when it was more settled. Settled. You would have said no, Jen. You would have insisted on trying again yourself. And Dr. Alcott had already said, when you say us, I said, do you mean you and Dr. Alcott? Or you and Vera? Or the 3 of you together in a room I wasn't invited to? He pressed his lips together. That signature, I said, is not mine. I was in Cincinnati. I have the conference photos with timestamps. You signed my name on a medical consent form that authorized the use of my embryos, and then you filed it. Do you understand what that is? Jen, do you understand what that is, Max? He looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in his face before. Not remorse exactly, but a kind of stunned recognition, the look of a man who has walked into a building without noticing it was on fire and is now noticing. It was the only way. The third transfer nearly broke you. I watched you come apart in that parking lot. I watched you try to hold yourself together for 3 days afterwards so I wouldn't worry. And I couldn't. I couldn't sit by and watch it happen again. I couldn't watch you. You couldn't trust me, I said, with information about my own body. My voice was completely level. I was somewhere past the crying, past the heat, in a place where the temperature was even and the visibility was very clear. You looked at me and decided I was too broken to make decisions about my own reproductive future. And then you got Vera to carry my child without asking me. And you got your mother to... I paused. Your mother knows. He didn't deny it. And my doctor. A pause. He looked at the table. You built a room, I said, with everyone I trust in it. And you made a decision about my body in that room. And you left me out of it because you decided I couldn't handle the information. I let that sit between us for a long moment. That isn't love, Max. That's control. You can call it love all you want, but what you did is control. He didn't say anything. There was, at this point, nothing left to say that the facts hadn't already said more clearly. In the days that followed, I became a kind of archaeologist of my own recent history. I went back through it methodically, not naturally my mode. I was the chaotic one, the emotional one, the one without the color-coded folders. But something had shifted in me, and I found I could do it, could hold things still long enough to examine them from the right angle. I called Cascade's administrative line. I asked about coordination documentation for case CF2248. The woman on the phone, careful and selective in the way of someone who has been briefed, told me that consent had been received and verified, and that the patient's family had been in contact with the clinic. She stopped herself there. The patient's family. My husband. A pause. I believe there was a coordination letter sent to your primary care provider earlier in the process. I thanked her. I ended the call. Dr. Miriam Alcott, my OB-GYN of 6 years, the woman I had recommended to my mother, had received a coordination letter from Cascade Fertility Center about a surrogacy arrangement involving my embryos. She had not mentioned it. She had seen me 3 months ago for my annual appointment, had asked with her particular measured gentleness how I was feeling emotionally these days, had listened to me say, "Better, actually, the break is helping," had nodded and smiled and renewed my vitamin prescription. She had looked me in the eyes, and she had known. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and my arms across my knees. The fluorescent light above the counter made everything the specific shade of reality that you can't argue with. This was the full shape of it. Not an affair. That would have been a cleaner betrayal. 2 parties, a comprehensible geometry. This was 4 people. My husband who arranged it, my best friend who agreed, his mother who encouraged, my doctor who knew and said nothing. 4 people who loved me, or claimed to, who looked at me and arrived, independently or collectively, at the same conclusion, that I was too fragile to be consulted about my own life, that protecting me meant excluding me, that the kindest thing they could do was make a decision about my body in a room where I wasn't present. I was not angry, sitting there on the kitchen floor. Anger has heat. What I had was colder and more precise than anger. It was the feeling of seeing something clearly for the first time and knowing exactly what you're looking at. I called Dana Pruitt at 8 that evening. I need you to listen to something, and I need you to hold the holy shit until I'm finished. Fair warning, I have a lot of them stored up, and I can't promise to hold them all. Go. I told her everything. She said, holy shit, 4 times. Once when I told her about the pregnancy, once at the embryos, once at the signature, and then a flat and quiet 4th one when I got to Dr. Alcott that was worse than the others because it wasn't theatrical. Then she said, okay, the forged signature is actionable, full stop. That is not a communication issue. That is fraud. I know a family law attorney who has handled surrogacy contract disputes. I'm texting you her name right now, Patricia Gaines. She doesn't waste words and she wears excellent shoes. A pause. Are you safe? Do you need to come here? I told her I was safe. She stayed on the line anyway. For an hour, mostly silent, the connection opened between us. Occasionally, she said something. Drink water, once, and you're not crazy, twice. And I found that the specific weight of another person on the other end of a phone line was more valuable than anything she could have said. I stayed on the kitchen floor and she stayed at her counter, and we didn't talk about the episode we were supposed to discuss that week, and nobody mentioned that the thing happening to me was a better true crime episode than anything we'd ever queued. I called Max's mother on a Saturday. Eleanor Stanton had called me first. She did every Saturday, the punctuality of a standing appointment, and I let it go to voicemail. Her message was, Jennifer, I've heard you've had some questions about recent events. I'd love to sit down and talk things through as a family. The word family in Eleanor's mouth always had the quality of a territory marker, evenly, with the specific politeness that is not warmth. When did you find out? I asked when she picked up. Her pause was too short. She'd been expecting it. Max told me in October. He asked for my input on how best to... He asked for your input, smoothly, composed. He needed someone to discuss the situation with. He was concerned about your emotional stability. We both were. You discussed my emotional stability, I said. Quiet, controlled, with absolute precision. And then decided together that I didn't get to participate in a conversation about my own reproductive future? Jennifer, we were watching you come apart after that 3rd transfer. Max loves you. He was trying to protect you from information about my own body. From another heartbreak. Her voice sharpened slightly, the gloss slipping just enough. You were barely functional. We made a decision that protected you. If you want to be angry at someone, I'm not angry, Eleanor. And this was, I realized, genuinely true. I'm clarifying facts, for the record, because there's going to be a record. I let that sit for a moment. With the specific calm that is a form of force. Enjoy your weekend. I ended the call and looked at my hands for a minute. They were completely steady. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Alcott for the following Wednesday. I told the receptionist it was a follow-up. I drove to her office in a suspended calm, parked in the patient lot, sat in the waiting room, and read an article about container gardening without absorbing a single word of it. When the nurse called my name, I stood up, straightened my coat, and walked in. Dr. Alcott was in her 60s, silver-haired, reading glasses on a beaded chain identical to Madame Rose's. I noticed this and filed it away as one of those coincidences the universe deploys without care for narrative subtlety. She greeted me with her careful warmth, and I sat in the chair across from her desk and said, looking directly at her, "You received correspondence from Cascade Fertility Center regarding my embryos, about a surrogacy arrangement involving my genetic material. You didn't tell me." Something moved behind her trained expression, A small adjustment, a ship correcting course. Jennifer, please don't start with my name in that voice, I said. Not unkind, but absolutely clear. I've been a patient here for 6 years. I've sent you 2 referrals. I trusted you with things about my body that I've shared with almost no one else. I need you to answer me. Did you know? 4 seconds of silence, with the posture of someone absorbing a hit they know they've earned. I received a coordination letter in early October from Dr. Howell's office. And you didn't contact me. Your husband indicated that you were my husband, I said. Indicated to you, my doctor, what he had decided about my medical information. And you accepted his representation over my right to know. I let that sit. I'm filing a formal complaint with the state medical board. I want you to know that directly from me before I do it. I think you deserve that. I also think you made a significant ethical error, and I believe you know that. I stood up. I'm going to need a new physician. I'm sorry to lose you. I mean that. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. Then I started the engine. 3 weeks after the cafe, I sat in my kitchen at 2 a.m. with the Blue Bee mug in front of me, filled with something I'd started as tea and let go cold. The house was quiet. Max was sleeping in the other room, which I had spent some time thinking about, whether it said something about his guilt or just about his nature, about people who make decisions and then find peace in them because the decision is made and there's nowhere left for the guilt to go. I had not slept. I had a yellow legal pad in front of me, and I was making a list, which was so unlike me, the chaotic one, the one who kept everything in her head, that it felt almost like someone else's handwriting. At the top, what I know. Below it, in my case coordinator's hand, Max arranged surrogacy using our embryos in September without my consent. Forged signature on consent form, October 14th, when I was in Cincinnati. His mother knew and encouraged him. Dr. Alcott received the coordination letter and stayed silent. Vera agreed, for love and for money, and because Max convinced her I was too fragile to be trusted with the truth. The transfer was completed. The pregnancy is at 23 weeks. The baby is mine, biologically and legally. On the other side of the page, what I feel. Below that, I sat for a long time without writing anything, because the feelings had passed through their first phase, the shock, the grief, the kind of rage that burns white and then burns out, and what remained was harder to name. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, something more like a very clear view of what my life had actually been, stripped of the soft focus I'd been applying to it for 4 years. Max loved me. I believed that, past tense and present tense simultaneously, which is one of the stranger things love requires you to hold. But the shape of his love had control in it, a certainty about my limits that he'd never once asked me about. He had looked at me and made a determination about what I could handle, and then arranged the world accordingly, and recruited the people around me to cooperate. And the result was a conspiracy of tenderness that left me entirely outside a decision about my own body. The kindest conspiracy imaginable. The most complete removal of my agency by people who genuinely believed they were doing right by me. I wrote, I am not broken enough to be managed. Then I wrote the list. Attorney, Patricia Gaines, Thursday. Medical board complaint, filed by email before bed. Letter to Vera, still unsent. The real conversation with Max, Not the evidence presentation, but the one that would determine whether this marriage was salvageable and on what terms. Call to my mother, whom I still hadn't told because I was still working out what I was saying and what it meant. I picked up the mug. The cold tea tasted like nothing much. The chip near the base caught against my thumb, and I noticed it for the second time and left it there. I sat in my kitchen in the middle of the night, and I thought about the 4 frozen embryos and the version of me who had sat in the Cascade waiting room twice with Vera beside her, holding a paper gown shut in the back and staring at the ceiling tiles during the retrievals, who had cried in the parking lot after the first failed transfer, with her face pressed against the headrest so Max wouldn't see in the rearview mirror. That woman had deserved a seat at every table where her body was being discussed. She had not been given one. I picked up the mug. The cold tea tasted like nothing much. The chip near the base caught against my thumb, and I noticed it for the second time and left it there. I sat in my kitchen in the middle of the night, and I thought about the 4 frozen embryos and the version of me who had sat in the Cascade waiting room twice with Vera beside her, holding a paper gown shut in the back and staring at the ceiling tiles during the retrievals, who had cried in the parking lot after the first failed transfer, with her face pressed against the headrest so Max wouldn't see in the rearview mirror. That woman had deserved a seat at every table where her body was being discussed. She had not been given one. I also thought about who I had been in this marriage, and I tried to be honest about it, because honesty, even the uncomfortable kind, was the instrument I had. I had let Max manage things because I was tired and because I trusted him and because it was easier than fighting for every administrative detail when I was already fighting just to get through the weeks. I had signed forms without reading them closely because reading them closely was another small grief, and I had enough of those. I had called his thoroughness care and his certainty strength and his efficiency love. And none of those reframings were entirely wrong. He did care. He was thorough. The love was real. But they were incomplete. Reframing is not the same as seeing clearly. And somewhere in all of it, the line between being cared for and being managed had blurred until I couldn't find it anymore. And Max had stopped looking for it too. And here we were. My signature on a document I never signed. My embryos in my best friend's body. 4 people in a room where my name was constantly spoken and I was never present. The social work training surfaced, as it sometimes did in moments of crisis, like a flotation device I'd forgotten I was wearing. In case management, we talked about the difference between protecting someone and serving someone. Protecting removes agency to prevent harm. Serving preserves agency so the person can determine their own path, even through the hard parts, even through the grief. Max had protected me. He had never once served me in the way that mattered most, by trusting that I could bear my own life. The terrible thing was that this distinction, the one that had organized my professional work for 6 years, was one I had failed to apply to myself. I had let him protect me because I was so used to the comfort of it that I stopped checking whether the protection had any regard for my own will underneath it. The version of herself that was done being managed. Okay, I said. Okay. I went to bed at 3:30 and fell asleep within minutes, which surprised me. In the morning, I reached for the Blue Bee mug and filled it with the expensive coffee Max had bought last week without asking. It tasted, for the first time in months, like a deliberate choice. It was Cass Fenwick who said the thing that unlocked it at Tuesday Club 3 days before everything came to a head. We were discussing an episode about a cold case reopened 20 years after the fact, and Dana was explaining, with the specific relish she reserved for procedural detail, how the investigator had cracked the whole thing open using an absence rather than a presence. The document should have been in the drawer, Dana said, and it wasn't. That was the tell. Not what was there, what wasn't. She looked around the group. Absence is evidence. And Cass said, in her particular dry way, so is the presence of something that shouldn't be there. I thought about the letter in the kitchen drawer, addressed only to Max. I thought about my own body, which had been doing things I hadn't been monitoring. I went home after the meeting and stood in my bathroom and counted backward. The counting landed somewhere that made me very still. I had one pregnancy test left in the cabinet under the sink, the last of a 3-pack, bought months ago in a different context, a different stage of things. I sat on the edge of the tub and I waited. In the 2 minutes that followed, my hands were completely steady. After everything they'd been through, they were steady. The line appeared. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about Madame Rosa at the train station, with her laminated price list and her holiday tablecloth velvet and her coffee-stained cards and her specific, accidental, perfectly targeted accuracy. The train leaving without you was not a failure. It was a correction. You left the keys to the situation at home. I had, in fact, left my actual house keys on the counter when I ran out that afternoon. I'd had to use the spare under the planter, and in the days that followed, I'd forgotten this entirely. But that wasn't what she meant. What she meant, what she had accidentally, perfectly meant, was that everything I needed was already in the place I'd been running from. I almost laughed. I didn't quite. I set the test on the counter. I went to the kitchen and picked up the blue bee mug and held it for a moment, the warm ceramic against my palms, the little chip under my thumb. And I thought, everything is going to be different. Not everything is going to be okay. Not in the uncomplicated way that phrase gets deployed. Not yet. Not without work. But different. And I had assembled enough evidence by now to know that different was something I could handle. The attorney meeting was on a Thursday. Max didn't know I had a lawyer until the day before, and the way he reacted, not with anger, but with a careful recalibration, an immediate repositioning, told me he'd been expecting to manage this conversation the way he managed everything. He had not anticipated that I would arrive with documentation, with a specific legal understanding of what had been done, and with Patricia Gaines, who wore sensible flats and did not waste words. Patricia laid out the facts in 4 minutes. Level, methodical, without affect. The forged signature on the surrogacy consent form constituted fraud. That was not an interpretation. It was a description of a legal category. There were remedies available, ranging in severity depending on the outcome we were pursuing. At no point in her 4 minutes did her voice carry malice, because the facts carried it for her. Max's attorney, a man named Gerstein, who had clearly been briefed that this would be a challenging meeting, attempted twice to frame the matter as a communication breakdown between spouses. Both times, Patricia looked at him with the patience of a woman who has heard every reframe and is unmoved by them. The consent form has a forged signature, counselor. That's not a communication issue. The second time she said it, Max looked at the table and did not look up again for a while. I sat across from my husband and looked at him. Really looked, in a way I hadn't been able to since the cafe, and saw someone I recognized and didn't recognize simultaneously. He looked depleted. He looked like a man who had been completely certain he was right and was now living inside the specific agony of having been wrong in a way that costs more than he'd calculated. He had a coffee stain on his cuff that he hadn't noticed. Max Stanton, who noticed everything, had a coffee stain on his cuff and didn't know it was there. I said, "Here's what I want. We continue the surrogacy. That baby is my daughter, biologically, legally, in every sense that matters. And I'm not going to disrupt Vera's pregnancy at 23 weeks, and I wouldn't if the law allowed it. We update the contract to reflect my actual consent, my real signature, my genuine agreement. Vera and I determine our relationship on our own terms, without your management of that process. The medical board complaint stands, regardless of anything else that's decided in this room." I paused. "And Max, if you ever, in any context, for any reason, regardless of how certain you are that you're right, make a unilateral decision about my body, my medical care, or my reproductive future again, I will not be sitting at this table. I'll be at a different one, with different paperwork. Are we clear?" Gerstein started to speak. Max raised one hand briefly, and Gerstein stopped. Max looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, we're clear." It was not a triumph. Triumph is louder than this, hotter. This was something quieter, a settling, the sensation of a fractured thing being set, not comfortable, not healed, but aligned for the first time in weeks. Eleanor Stanton's birthday dinner was on the Sunday after the Thursday meeting, and I went. Max didn't expect it, which was the point. I arrived in a blue dress I'd bought specifically, a color I felt clear in, and I kissed Eleanor's cheek and said, "Happy birthday, Eleanor. You look wonderful." I sat down, I ate my soup, I participated in the table conversation with the sociable attention of a woman who has nothing to prove, which is its own kind of statement. When Eleanor said, midway through the main course, that difficult situations have a way of bringing families together, I set my fork down, looked at her directly, and said, "That's interesting. I've been thinking about how difficult situations also have a way of revealing who created them. Haven't you found that?" The table, Max's aunt, his cousin, a family friend named Carl who came every year, went very still. Eleanor looked at me for a beat. Something moved through her eyes, some rapid reassessment. Then she picked up her fork with perfect composure and said, "I think we should enjoy this lovely meal." "Absolutely," I said, and picked mine up too. I didn't say anything else about it. I didn't need to. The meal continued, slightly too warm in the way of people who have collectively decided to pretend they haven't witnessed something. And Eleanor did not look at me for the rest of the evening with the proprietary confidence she'd always had. The eye contact, when it came, was different, measured, as if she'd been reminded of something she'd let herself forget, that she did not, in fact, know the full dimensions of me. I went to Vera's apartment on a Saturday in April. She was 28 weeks, round and slow and tired, and trying not to show how much she'd been waiting for me. She opened the door and looked at me with the eyes of someone waiting for a verdict that could go either way. I handed her an envelope first. She read it standing in the doorway, one hand on the doorframe. The letter said in 4 paragraphs that I understood what she had agreed to and why. That I understood money and love are both real things, and that both had been present in her decision, and that holding both simultaneously didn't make either one less true. That I was not able to be her friend in the way I had been, not right now, possibly not for a long time, because something had been done to me with her participation, and the shape of my trust had changed in ways I was still mapping. but that the baby she was carrying was my daughter. And my daughter's birth mother was not someone I would cut out of the picture, because that wasn't right, and it wasn't what I wanted. At the bottom I had written, "When she's born, I'll be there. After that, we figure it out, one day at a time." Vera finished reading and pressed the letter against her chest and cried in the specific way of someone who has no argument left, who has run out of every version of sorry and landed in something more durable. "I'm so sorry, Jen. I know that there's no version of it that—" "I know," I said. "I know you are." And I meant it. It didn't repair the thing. It wasn't supposed to. I drove home and took the Blue Bee mug from its shelf and drank my coffee standing at the window watching the street. The morning light came through in the specific October way, slanted, gold, and caught the little painted bee on the side of the mug, and I looked at it for a while. 7 months later, I was sitting in a hospital corridor at 11:40 p.m. while my daughter was being born. She wasn't mine yet on paper. The parental order was pending, which Patricia Gaines described as a formality said in the specific voice of someone who handles formalities with absolute competence. But she had been mine since September, since the beginning, since before I knew. I've been calling her Anya in my head for 2 months, since Vera texted me the 20-week ultrasound without any text at all, just the image, and I sat with my phone for 5 minutes before I could answer. Max sat beside me in the corridor with 2 cups of vending machine coffee that tasted like hot brown water and said very little, which was the version of him I had come to value most, the version that had learned, through considerable difficulty, that some moments don't require management. Kirill had come 6 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning in late October, with a speed that surprised everyone, delivered in this same hospital, in a room with a window that faced the parking garage. He arrived looking extremely skeptical of the whole situation, which I found appropriate. He had Max's forehead and my stubbornness, and a specific quality of attention that made everyone in the delivery room agree he was paying very close attention to what was happening around him. I found this encouraging. I held both of them on a Wednesday afternoon in November, one at a time, in the room that used to be Max's home office. He had cleared it without being asked, carrying the color-coded folders and the labeled file boxes to the garage. All of it gone, replaced by a crib and a changing table, and the specific chaos of an infant and a near-infant sharing airspace. He had set up a new file box in the garage, I noticed, labeled neatly, Anya and Kirill, documents. Organized, efficient. Trying, in the language he had, to be a different version of himself. We were in couples therapy by then, every other Tuesday, with a woman named Dr. Sharma, who had a Georgia O'Keeffe print on her wall and refused to let either of us take the easy way out of any conversation. It was hard work. It was the right kind. The formal complaint resulted in a letter of censure for Dr. Alcott, not a license suspension, but a formal notation on the record and a mandated review of patient communication protocols. It was not nothing. She sent me a handwritten letter that I read once and then filed. I did not respond. The complaint had said what needed saying. Dana Pruitt came to visit in November and held Kirill with the studied care of someone handling an item of great fragility and unclear instructions. He looks like a slightly alarmed potato, and I think he is completely perfect. I laughed for the first time in what felt like several weeks, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. The unresolved regrouped in January at my house for the first time, with Vera's attendance deferred by mutual quiet agreement for the season. Dana brought a charcuterie board of genuine architectural complexity, 3 kinds of olives and something labeled artisanal honeycomb that Cass regarded with the focused skepticism of a woman who distrusts novelty foods on principle. Lila cried a little, because Lila always cried, and we had all long since stopped trying to prevent it and started simply handing her a napkin in advance, which was a form of love. Cass looked at the board for a long moment and said, "Are we finally the episode or still the prequel?" Dana said, "We are absolutely the episode, and it is a good one." We listened to a cold case that resolved unexpectedly, the kind where the truth was stranger than anyone suspected and yet obvious in retrospect, the kind where you sit back at the end and say, of course, it was there the whole time." And I sat on my own couch in my own house with both babies asleep down the hall and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like the protagonist of my own story, rather than an administrative problem in someone else's plan. We didn't talk about Vera at Tuesday Club that January. By February, we were talking about her a little. Lila with more grace than I'd expected, Cass with a dry precision that was its own form of solidarity, Dana with opinions that she expressed at some length and that I appreciated, even as I asked her twice to keep her voice down because the babies were sleeping. By March, we'd arrived at a provisional understanding. Vera's absence wasn't permanent. The group would shift. Most things do, eventually, if you let them. Eleanor Stanton met Kirill for the first time when he was 8 months old. This was not an accident. I found out about Madame Rosa through Dana, 3 months after Anya was born, because Dana has an extraordinary network of people who find things out for her. Rosa Petrov had worked as a patient accounts coordinator at Maplewood Regional Hospital for 11 years before the billing department was contracted out. She had, in fact, taken an online tarot certification course, 3 parts, self-paced, available on YouTube. Her Instagram account had 96 followers, not the 847 I had internally estimated, apparently rounding up aggressively even in my own head. Her most recent post was a series of predictions for the upcoming month, headlined, "What the Cards Say," and the comments were from 4 regular followers and one that said simply, "Madame Rosa, you changed my life." I clicked like. I felt it was the right thing to do. I drink my coffee from the blue bee mug on Good Mornings, same as always. Kirill has grabbed the handle twice with his sticky grip, and I've caught it both times. The chip near the base has a companion now, a smaller one, opposite side, that I discovered one morning and looked at for a while and then left where it was. Chipped things can still hold what you put in them. Sometimes they hold it better, once you know exactly where the weak spots are and can account for them. Max said, "Everything is going to be okay," to me in the parking lot of Cascade Fertility Center after the 3rd failed transfer, with his arms around me and the afternoon traffic going past. He said it the way people say things they believe are true in a general sense, even when the specific future is entirely unclear. I believed him, the way you believe a person you love when they're trying. Last Tuesday, I said it to Kirill in the 3 a.m. dark when he was unimpressed by the world and needed reminding that it was going to resolve itself. Everything is going to be okay. And this time, I meant it differently, not as a promise borrowed from someone who loved me, but as something I'd assembled myself, from evidence, from a yellow legal pad and a phone call with a litigation paralegal and a forged signature I'd held under a desk lamp and recognized for what it was. From the blue mug and the chipped glaze and the attorney in sensible shoes and the specific, clarifying knowledge of what I was worth and what I would not let anyone, even someone who loved me, even someone certain they were right, decide for me again. Anya was 4 months old. She had Vera's eyes, which I was still learning how to carry. She had my stubbornness. It showed up early in the set of her jaw when she decided she was done with something. I recognized it immediately. On most mornings, that recognition felt like exactly the right kind of beginning.